This is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and in this video we're going to continue reading through Homer's Iliad, picking up about halfway through Book 5. We left off at the end of the previous video after the scene where Diomed had become angry with Aphrodite or Venus and chased after as if he would attack her and actually did injure her, cut her hand. I believe it was because she was trying to rescue Aeneas, and we had that interesting reflection on the relationships between the gods and men, the differences between the gods and men, and in that Greek religion, it is a very interesting consideration of exactly what gods are. You know, you have this strange scene where there's an incarnate goddess, as it were, who is supposedly a spirit and yet comes in the appearance of a person and is injured and actually has some sort of divine blood, if you remember that. We saw that. So just an interesting scene, but we're going to pick up after that event at the top of what is page 96 in our printed book. You can see page 96 up here. We read the top line and then stopped in our last video. So we've got about 14 pages, I think, to read here to finish Book 5. This is a very long book, so let's just make our way through it, and I'll try to limit comments to what is necessary or at least helpful, and we'll try to finish up Book 5 in this video. So let's begin here. So spoke the god who darts celestial fires. He dreads his fury and some steps retires. That is, Diomed steps back. Then Phoebus, Apollo, bore the chief of Venus's race to Troy's high fane and to his holy place. Latona there and Phoebe healed the wound, with vigor armed him and with glory crowned. This done, the patron of the silver bow a phantom raised, the same in shape and show, with great Aeneas. Such the form he bore, and such in fight the radiant arms he wore. Around the spectre bloody wars are waged, and Greece and Troy with clashing shields engaged. Meantime, on Ilion's tower Apollo stood. Notice Homer's and remember this is an English translation, but notice how the authors make use of different expressions to bring us to different scenes in the midst of this chaotic battle. It's a very challenging task to narrate the events of a battle with action going on all over the place, but pay attention to how the authors do that. That's one of our topics in English composition. Meantime, on Ilion's tower Apollo stood, and calling Mars, thus urged the raging god. So Apollo, the god Apollo here, calls upon Mars, or Ares, the god of battle. Stern power of arms, Apollo says, by whom the mighty fall, who bathest in blood and shakest the embattled wall, rise in thy wrath to hell's abhorred abodes, dispatch yon Greek and vindicate the gods. First rosy Venus felt his brutal rage, me next he charged and dares all heaven engage. This is the idea of hubris in Greek religion, where human pride goes beyond its proper bounds, and the idea here is that when a man exalts himself, the gods cut him down. The wretch, and he's talking about Diomed again, Tydides, the wretch would brave high heaven's immortal sire, his triple thunder and his bolts of fire. So, pretty interesting. Apollo actually calls upon Mars to destroy Diomed. The god of battle issues on the plain, stirs all the ranks, and fires the Trojan train. In form like Acamas, the Thracian guide, enraged to Troy's retiring chiefs, he cried. So he calls out, Mars calls out to the leaders of the Trojan army who at that point were retreating. He says, "How long, ye sons of Priam, will ye fly, run away, and unrevenged see Priam's people die? Still unresisted shall the foe destroy, and stretch the slaughter to the gates of Troy? Lo, brave Aeneas sinks beneath his wound, not godlike Hector more in arms renowned. Haste all, and take the generous warrior's part." Notice again the use of that term generous. "Haste all, and take the generous warrior's part." He spoke. New courage swelled each hero's heart. So we have this idea again of the gods giving strength to men. Here they give virtue, they give courage to the men. That's similar to the Christian idea of grace. Sarpedon first his ardent soul expressed, and turned to Hector these bold words addressed. "Say, chief, is all thy ancient valor lost? Where are thy threats, and where thy glorious boast? That propped alone by Priam's race should stand Troy's sacred walls, nor need a foreign hand. Now thy country calls her wonted means accustomed or traditional or historic, I guess we can say. Now thy country calls her wonted friends, and the proud vaunt in just derision ends. Remote they stand while alien troops engage." In other words, you've got foreign assistants here fighting for you while you Trojan leaders retreat. You should be the ones defending your city. Why are foreigners defending your city while you think about saving yourselves? Remote you stand while alien troops engage, like trembling hounds, like frightened dogs before the lion's rage. Far distance hence I held my wide command, where foaming Xanthus laves the Lycian land. With ample wealth, the wish of mortals blessed, a beauteous wife and infant at her breast. With those I left whatever dear could be. Greece, if she conquers, nothing wins from me. I have nothing to lose. I'm here to help you, and you're not fighting. Yet first in fight my Lycian bands I cheer, and long to meet this mighty man ye fear, that is Achilles. While Hector idle stands, nor bids the brave their wives, their infants, and their altars save. Haste, warrior, haste, preserve thy threatened state, or one vast burst of all-involving fate, full o'er your towers shall fall and sweep away sons, sires, and wives, an undistinguished prey. In other words, if you don't fight, fate will wipe away your entire city. And there's an example of that expression, fate helps those who help themselves, or fate favors the brave. Rouse all thy Trojans, urge thy aids to fight. These claim thy thoughts by day, thy watch by night. With force incessant the brave Greeks oppose. Such cares thy friends deserve, and such thy foes. In other words, you've got enemies so significant that all your thoughts should be on them, and you've got friends so faithful that you should be leading them as they are present to help you. So notice Hector was appealed to here by two people. First of all, by Apollo, who spoke to the Trojans, and then by, who was this again? This man from Xanthus. Sarpedon. So he's been reproached now by both God and by a fellow man. Stung to the heart, the generous Hector hears, but just reproof with decent silence bears. He knows that Sarpedon is right. And from his proud car the prince impetuous springs, on earth he leaps, his brazen armor rings. 2 shining spears are brandished in his hands, thus armed he animates his drooping bands. He fills with spirit his bands of soldiers that had been losing courage. He revives their ardor, turns their steps from flight, turns them from running away back to face the battle, and wakes anew the dying flames of fight. They turn, they stand, the Greeks their fury dare, condense their powers and wait the growing war. Notice now we have a simile here, an illustration. As when on Ceres, Ceres is the goddess of wheat, as when on Ceres' sacred floor the swain spreads the wide fan to clear the golden grain. He's talking about cleaning the wheat. The fan is used to blow away all of the chaff, all of the junk, so just the wheat berries remain, to clear the golden grain. And the light chaff, before the breeze is born, ascends in clouds from off the heapy corn. Corn is just the word for grain in ancient times. The gray dust, rising with collected winds, drives o'er the barn and whitens all the hinds. So white with dust the Grecian host appears, from trampling steeds and thundering charioteers. The dusky clouds from labored earth arise and roll in smoking volumes to the skies. We have this image of the dusty battlefield. In modern times, you'll hear people talk about the fog of war, sort of the chaos. There's smoke, there's fire, there's noise all over the place. It could even be in the darkness of night. This is referred to as the fog of war, sort of this terrifying, uncertain condition in which war is fought. Homer describes it here in terms of the dust of the battlefield. The dusky clouds from labored earth arise and roll in smoking volumes to the skies. Mars hovers o'er them with his sable shield and adds new horrors to the darkened field. Pleased with his charge and ardent to fulfill in Troy's defense Apollo's heavenly will, soon as from fight the blue-eyed maid, that is Minerva or Athena, retires, each Trojan bosom with new warmth he fires. And now the god from forth his sacred fane produced Aeneas to the shouting train, alive, unharmed, with all his peers around, erect he stood and vigorous from his wound. Inquiries none they made, the dreadful day, no pause of words admits, no dull delay. Fierce discord storms. Apollo loud exclaims, fame calls, Mars thunders, and the fields in flames. Stern Diomed with either Ajax stood, and great Ulysses bathed in hostile blood, that is, bathed in the blood of his enemies. Embodied close the laboring Grecian train, the fiercest shock of charging host sustain. Unmoved and silent, the whole war they wait, serenely dreadful. That's a great description. Serenely dreadful means peacefully terrifying. They're quiet and calm in battle. Their calmness is dreadful and as fixed as fate. They're unmovable. So when the embattled clouds in dark array along the skies their gloomy lines display, when now the north his boisterous rage has spent, that is the north wind, and peaceful sleeps the liquid element. The low-hung vapors, motionless and still, rest on the summits of the shaded hill, till the mass scatters as the winds arise, dispersed and broken through the ruffled skies. Nor was the general wanting to his train, from troop to troop he toils through all the plain. Ye Greeks, be men, right? Act like men. The charge of battle bear. Your brave associates and yourselves revere. Have respect for yourselves. Have respect for your brothers. Let glorious acts, more glorious acts inspire, and catch from breast to breast the noble fire. Encourage each other to do great deeds by doing great deeds yourself. On valor's side, the odds of combat lie. In other words, the battle goes to the brave. The brave live glorious, or lamented die. You're either going to die and be lamented and remembered forever, or you're going to live and win glory. So in either case, the outcome is desirable for you. Therefore, fight as though you have nothing to lose. The wretch who trembles in the field of fame meets death, and worse than death, eternal shame. So there's this idea that dying in cowardice is like living and experiencing a second death. It's bad enough that you were killed in battle, but you died shamefully, and so you live in eternal shame. You see how important this ability to encourage and rouse your fellow soldiers would have been in this ancient hand-to-hand combat. These words he seconds with his flying lance, to meet whose point was strong Deikoon's chance. There's an example, if you're studying Latin or Greek grammar, here's an example of a diaresis, right? That double dot over the second vowel to show that this is not a diphthong. It's two separate syllables. Deikoon. Aeneas' friend, and in his native place, honored and loved like Priam's royal race. Long had he fought the foremost in the field, but now the monarch's lance pierced through his shield too weak, the furious dart to stay. Through his broad belt the weapon forced its way. The grisly wound dismissed his soul to hell, meaning the underworld. His arms around him rattled as he fell. Then fierce Aeneas, brandishing his blade, in dust Orsilochus and Crethon laid, whose sire, Diocleus, wealthy, brave, and great, in well-built Pheræ held his lofty seat, sprung from Alpheus' plenteous stream that yields increase of harvests to the Pylian fields. He got Orsilochus, Diocleus he, and these descended in the third degree. Too early expert in the martial toil, in sable ships they left their native soil, to avenge Atrides, that is Menelaus, now untimely slain. They fell with glory on the Phrygian plain. So 2 young mountain lions, nursed with blood in deep recesses of the gloomy wood, rush fearless to the plains, and uncontrolled depopulate the stalls and waste the fold, till pierced at distance from their native den, o'erpowered they fall beneath the force of men. So these 2 great men who fought on behalf of, I'm pretty sure this is the Greek side, because I think this is saying that Aeneas is fighting against them and kills them. They rush fearless to the plains and uncontrolled depopulate the stalls and waste the fold until they're killed by men. So he compares them to young mountain lions that run into the herd and are killing the animals until finally they're killed by men. Prostrate on earth their beauteous bodies lay like mountain firs, as tall and straight as they. Great Menelaus views with pitying eyes. Yeah, so they're Greeks, just to make that clear. Lifts his bright lance and at the victor flies. Mars urged him on, yet ruthless in his hate, the god but urged him to provoke his fate. He thus advancing, Nestor's valiant son shakes for his danger and neglects his own. Struck with the thought, should Helen's lord be slain, and all his country's glorious labors vain, already met the threatening heroes stand, the spears already tremble in their hand. In rushed Antilochus his aid to bring, and fall or conquer by the Spartan king. So it seems that Aeneas kills these two Greek men. Menelaus sees Aeneas kill them. Then Menelaus runs at Aeneas, and this man Antilochus sees Menelaus running after Aeneas and is afraid for Menelaus's life, so comes to help him. These seen, the Dardan backward turned his course, brave as he was, and shunned unequal force. The Dardan refers to Aeneas. The breathless bodies to the Greeks they drew, then mix in combat and their toils renew. So Aeneas, seeing the two men coming, chooses to retreat rather than try to fight both of them. And they take the bodies of the two killed men and bring them back into the Greek ranks. First, Pylaemenes, great in battle bled, who sheathed in brass the Paphlagonians led. Atrides marked him where sublime he stood, fixed in his throat the javelin drank his blood. The faithful Mydon, as he turned from fight, his flying coursers sunk to endless night. A broken rock by Nestor's son was thrown, his bended arm received the falling stone. From his numbed hand the ivory-studded reins dropped in the dust and trailed along the plains. Meanwhile his temples feel a deadly wound, he groans in death and ponderous sinks to ground. Deep drove his helmet in the sands, and there the head stood fixed and quivering legs in air, till trampled flat beneath the courser's feet. So he was crushed by his horse's feet. The youthful victor mounts his empty seat and bears the prize in triumph to the fleet. So you've got this constant theme of taking spoil from the battle and running it over to the ships and storing it away, like collecting your trophies in the midst of the battle and running them over to deposit them in the ships and then to get back into the battlefield. So you see how the soldiers, not only did they win fame on the battlefield among their fellow soldiers, but they actually won prizes that were symbols of their achievements. That was another source of glory and riches. Great Hector, the Trojan chief, saw this, and raging at the view, pours on the Greeks. The Trojan troops pursue. He fires his host with animating cries and brings along the furies of the skies. Mars, stern destroyer, and Bellona dread, flame in the front and thunder at their head. This swells the tumult and the rage of fight that shakes a spear that casts the dreadful light. Where Hector marched, the god of battles shined, now stormed before him, and now raged behind. So there we have an image that's similar to God going before the Israelites in the pillar of cloud and fire, just a symbol of the God being with him wherever he goes. Tydides, that is Diomed, paused amidst his full career. Then first the hero's manly breast knew fear. So great Diomed senses something isn't right and is filled with fear. And we have an illustration here. As when some simple swain his cot forsakes, and wide through fens an unknown journey takes, If chance a swelling brook his passage stay, and foam impervious cross the wanderer's way, confused he stoops, a length of country past, eyes the rough waves, and tired returns at last. Amazed no less, the great Tydides stands. He stayed, and turning, thus addressed his band. So Diomed speaks to the Greek soldiers, sensing that something isn't right. No wonder, Greeks, that all to Hector yield. Secure of favoring gods, he takes the field. In other words, he's got divine assistance with him. His strokes they, the gods, second, and avert our spears. Behold where Mars in mortal arms appears. Retire then, warriors, but sedate and slow. Retire, but with your faces to the foe. Trust not too much your unavailing might. 'Tis not with Troy, but with the gods ye fight. So we see the wisdom of Diomedes or Diomed. We see that he's not interested in fighting against Hector if he senses that the gods are with him. So we see some wisdom there. Now near the Greeks the black battalions drew, and first 2 leaders valiant Hector slew. His force Anchialus and Menestheus found, in every art of glorious war renowned. In these same car or chariot the chiefs to combat ride, and fought united, and united died. Struck at the sight, the mighty Ajax glows with thirst for vengeance, and assaults the foes. His massy or heavy spear with matchless fury sent through Amphius's belt and heaving belly went. Amphius Apessus's happy soil possessed, with herds abounding, and with treasures blessed. But fate, resistless from his country led, the chief to perish at his people's head. Shook with his fall his brazen armor rung, and fierce to seize it, conquering Ajax sprung. Around his head an iron tempest reigned, and wood of spears his ample shield sustained. Beneath one foot the yet warm corpse he pressed, and drew his javelin from the bleeding breast. He could no more. The showering darts denied to spoil his glittering arms and plumy pride. Now foes on foes came pouring on the fields, with bristling lances and compacted shields, till in the steely circle straightened round, forced he gives way, and sternly quits the ground. So the battle was too intense for Diomed to get hold, or Ajax, to get hold of the armor that he had won, so he's got to leave it there in the field. While thus they strive, look at this name, Tlepolemos the Great, urged by the force of unresisted fate, burns with desire Sarpedon's strength to prove, that means to test. Alcides' offspring meets the son of Jove. Sheathed in bright arms each adverse chief came on, Jove's great descendant and his greater son. Prepared for combat ere the lance he tossed, the daring Rhodian from the island of Rhodes vents his haughty boast. What brings this Lycian, that is Sarpedon, what brings this Lycian counselor so far to tremble at our arms, not mix in war? Know thy vain self, nor let their flattery move, who style thee son of cloud-compelling Jove. How far unlike those chiefs of race divine, how vast the difference of their deeds and thine. So this Tlepolemus says to Sarpedon, don't flatter yourself, or don't listen to the flattery of those who refer to you as a son of Jove. Your deeds are nothing like such men's deeds. Jove got such heroes as my sire, whose soul no fear could daunt, nor earth nor hell control. Jove got such heroes as my sire, whose soul no fear could daunt, nor earth nor hell control. Troy felt his arm, and yon proud ramparts stand, raised on the ruins of his vengeful hand. With 6 small ships and but a slender train, he left the town, a wide deserted plain. But what art thou, who deedless look'st around, while unrevenged thy Lycians bite the ground, that is, eat the dust? Small aid to Troy thy feeble force can be, but wert thou greater, thou still must yield to me. Pierced by my spear, to endless darkness go, I make this present, or this gift, to the shades below. The son of Hercules, the Rhodian guide, thus haughty spoke, and the Lycian king Sarpedon replied, Thy sire, O prince, o'erturned the Trojan state, whose perjured monarch well deserved his fate. Those heavenly steeds the hero sought so far, false he detained, the just reward of war. Nor so content, the generous chief defied with base reproaches and unmanly pride. But you, unworthy the high race you boast, shall raise my glory when thy own is lost. So these two warriors are basically talking trash to each other. Now meet thy fate, and by Sarpedon slain, add one more ghost to Pluto's gloomy reign. Pluto being the god of the underworld, his gloomy reign being the realm of the dead under the earth. He spoke, both javelins at an instant flew. So this is equivalent to a duel in modern times. They threw their javelins at each other at the same time. Both struck, both wounded, but Sarpedon's slew. So Sarpedon's javelin struck, what's that man's name again? Tlepolemus, and killed him. Full in the boaster's neck, the weapon stood, transfixed his throat, and drank the vital or living blood. The soul disdainful seeks the caves of night, and his sealed eyes forever lose the light. Yet not in vain, Tlepolemus, and again, I don't know how to pronounce that. I'd have to look up the Greek. He was thrown, thy angry lance, which piercing to the bone, Sarpedon's thigh had robbed the chief of breath. But Jove was present and forbade his death. Borne from the conflict by his Lycian throng, the wounded hero dragged the lance along. His friends, each busied in his several part, through haste or danger, had not drawn the dart. The Greeks with slain Tlepolemus retired, whose fall Ulysses viewed, with fury fired. Doubtful if Jove's great son he should pursue, or pour his vengeance on the Lycian crew. But heaven and fate the first design withstand, nor this great death must grace Ulysses' hand. Minerva drives him on the Lycian train. Alastor, Cronius, Helios strewed the plain. Alcander, Prytanis, Noemon fell, and numbers more his sword had sent to hell. But Hector saw, and furious at the sight, rushed terrible amidst the ranks of fight. With joy Sarpedon viewed the wished relief, and faint lamenting thus implored the chief. So this is Sarpedon talking to Hector. Oh, suffer not the foe to bear away my helpless corpse, an unassisted prey. If I, unblessed, must see my son no more, my much-loved consort, wife, and my native shore, yet let me die in Ilion's sacred wall. Troy, in whose cause I fell, shall mourn my fall. So Sarpedon says, if I die here, let me be buried at Troy. I'd be honored to be buried here, and the people of Troy owe me for fighting for them. He spoke, nor Hector to the chief replies, but shakes his plume, and fierce to combat flies. Swift as a whirlwind drives the scattering foes, and dyes the ground with purple, that is blood, as he goes. Beneath a beech tree, which is Jove's consecrated shade, his mournful friends divine Sarpedon laid. Brave Pelagon, his favorite chief, was nigh, who wrenched the javelin from his sinewy, muscly thigh. The fainting soul stood ready, winged for flight, and o'er his eyeballs swam the shades of night. But Boreas, rising fresh, that is one of the gods of the winds, Boreas, rising fresh with gentle breath, recalled his spirit from the gates of death. So sort of breathed back into him the breath of life. The generous Greeks recede with tardy pace, though Mars and Hector thunder in their face. None turn their backs to mean ignoble flight. Slow they retreat, but even retreating, fight. So here, retreating is not a cowardly running away. There's two different kinds of retreating. There's one kind of retreat that's ignoble, where you're just running away out of fear. There's another retreat that's strategic because you're simply outnumbered. So these Greeks, they continue to fight as they retreat because they're retreating as a strategic move, not in fear or cowardice. Who first, who last, by Mars and Hector's hand, stretched in their blood, lay gasping on the sand. Tenthras the great, Orestes the renowned, for managed steeds, and Trechus pressed the ground, just listing the people who had been killed by Mars and Hector. Next, Oinomeus, this fancy symbol here is just the diphthong OE, pronounced oi or a, and Oinops or Aenops, offspring died, Oresbius, last fall groaning at their side, Oresbius, in his painted mitre gay, in fat Boeotia held his wealthy sway. So Oresbius was a wealthy man from Boeotia. Where lakes surround low Hyles, watery plain, a prince and people studious of their gain. The carnage, the word comes from carne, which is the idea of meat, from caro in Latin. The carnage, the meat or the flesh of that was being destroyed. Juno from the skies surveyed, and touched with grief bespoke the blue-eyed maid. So Juno speaks to Athena and says, "Oh, sight accursed! Shall faithless Troy prevail? And shall our promise to our people fail? How vain the word to Menelaus given by Jove's great daughter and the queen of heaven." We promised Menelaus victory, and here they're getting slaughtered by the Trojans. Now, as we read this, let's just pause for a second to remember, Achilles is not in battle. So all of this stuff is going on, and remember, this whole thing started when Thetis asked Jupiter to stir up this battle and bring honor to Achilles. So remember, all of this battle, everything that's going on, is leading us to the vindication or to the restoration of Achilles in his glory. So don't forget about Achilles. He's the main character, even though he's absent at present. Here we see Juno and Athena speaking to each other and saying, we've got to get this fixed because the Trojans suddenly have all the support of the gods and are slaughtering the Greeks who we have promised victory to. So we've got to do something. If warring gods forever guard their wall, Mars, red with slaughter, aids our hated foes. Haste, let us arm, and force with force oppose. This is a battle not just between men, but between the gods themselves. Juno spoke, and Minerva burns to meet the war, and now heaven's empress calls her blazing chariot. At her command rush forth the steeds divine, the heavenly horses. Rich with immortal gold, their trappings shine. Bright Hebe waits, by Hebe ever young. The whirling wheels are to the chariot hung. On thee bright axle turns the bidden wheel, of sounding brass the polished axle steel. 8 brazen spokes in radiant order flame, the circle's gold of uncorrupted frame. So we have a description here of this divine chariot, which is driven by Minerva, or possibly Juno. We'll see if it clarifies that. Such as the heavens produce, and round the gold 2 brazen or bronze rings of work divine were rolled. The bossy naves of solid silver shone, braces of gold suspend the moving throne. The car, the chariot, behind an arching figure bore. The bending concave formed an arch before. Silver the beam, the extended yoke was gold, and golden reins the immortal coursers hold. Remember, coursers are horses. Herself impatient to the ready car, the coursers joins and breathes revenge and war. Pallas, Athena, Minerva, 3 names of the same goddess. Pallas disrobes, her radiant veil untied, with flowers adorned, with art diversified. The labored veil her heavenly fingers wove, flows on the pavement of the court of Jove. Now heaven's dread arms her mighty limbs invest. Jove's cuirass blazes on her ample breast. That's her chest and back covering. Decked in sad triumph for the mournful field, o'er her broad shoulders hangs his horrid shield. Dire, black, tremendous, round the margin rolled, a fringe of serpents hissing guards the gold. All description of Athena's armor. Here all the terrors of grim war appear. Here rages force. Here tremble flight and fear. Here stormed contention. Here fury frowned, and the dire orb portentous Gorgon crowned. The massy golden helm she next assumes. She puts on her golden helmet, that dreadful nods with 4 o'ershading plumes, the big feathers or hairs that stand out from the top of the helmet. So vast the broad circumference contains 100 armies on 100 plains. The goddess thus the imperial car ascends, shook by her arm the mighty javelin bends, ponderous and huge, that when her fury burns, proud tyrants humbles, and whole hosts, whole armies o'erturns. Swift at the scourge, the ethereal means heavenly. Swift at the scourge, that means she strikes them with the whip, and they fly, these heavenly horses, while the smooth chariot cuts the liquid sky. Notice she's riding actually in the air. Heaven's gates spontaneous open to the powers, heaven's golden gates kept by the winged hours. Commissioned in alternate watch they stand, the sun's bright portals and the sky's command. Involve in clouds the eternal gates of day, or the dark barrier roll with ease away. The sounding hinges ring, these big gates move and the hinges groan, Homer says ring, on either side. The gloomy volumes pierced with light divide. The chariot mounts where deep in ambient skies confused Olympus's 100 heads arise, where far apart the thunderer fills his throne, o'er all the gods superior and alone. There, with her snowy hand, the queen restrains the fiery steeds, and thus to Jove complains. O sire, can no resentment touch thy soul? Can Mars rebel, and does no thunder roll? What lawless rage on yon forbidden plain? What rash destruction, and what heroes slain? Men who don't deserve to be struck. Venus and Phoebus, with the dreadful bow, smile on the slaughter and enjoy my woe. Mad, furious power, whose unrelenting mind no god can govern, and no justice bind. Say, mighty Father, or speak, mighty Father, shall we scourge this pride, and drive from fight the impetuous homicide? To whom, assenting, agreeing with Minerva, Jupiter says, go. This looks like Juno speaking, because he says, let Minerva be thy aid. To tame the monster god, Minerva knows, and oft afflicts his brutal breast with woes. He spoke, Saturnia, that's who it is, it's Saturnia speaking to Jupiter, ardent to obey, lashed her white steeds along the aerial way. Swift down the steep of heaven the chariot rolls, between the expanded earth and starry poles. Far as a shepherd from some point on high, o'er the wide main extends his boundless eye. Through such a space of air, with thundering sound, at every leap the immortals' coursers bound. Troy now they reached and touched those banks divine, where silver Simois and Scamander join. There Juno stopped, and her fair steeds unloosed, of air condensed a vapor circumfused. For these, impregnate with celestial dew, on Simois' brink ambrosial herbage grew. Thence to relieve the fainting Argive throng, smooth as the sailing doves they glide along. So the point of this passage here is simply that Juno and Minerva, or Juno and Athena, come to the assistance of the Greeks with Jupiter's permission. The best and bravest of the Grecian band, a warlike circle round Tydides stand. Such was their look, as lions bathed in blood, or foaming boars, that is, wild pigs, the terror of the wood. Heaven's empress mingles with the mortal crowd, and shouts in Stentor's sounding voice aloud. Stentor the strong, endued with brazen lungs, whose throats surpass the force of 50 tongues. So Minerva here speaks to the Greeks. The Argives, they're the men of Argos. Remember, Agamemnon was the king of Argos, so the Greek army can be referred to as the Argives. Inglorious Argives, to your race a shame. So notice that Athena does to the Greeks what Apollo and Mars previously did to the Trojans. She stirs them up to shame and rouses them to anger to lead them into battle. Inglorious Argives, to your race a shame, and only men in figure and in name. In other words, you don't act like men, you just have the bodies of men. Once from the walls your timorous foes engaged, while fierce in war divine Achilles raged. Now, issuing fearless, they possess the plain, now win the shores, and scarce the seas remain. So notice what she says to make them upset. She's saying, man, when Achilles was around, those Troys didn't dare step outside their gates, but now, with Achilles not here, look at you guys. You're getting slaughtered everywhere. So she does this to sort of stir them up by envy, stir them up by a desire for glory or by shame. Her speech new fury to their hearts conveyed, while near to Dides stood the Athenian maid. The king beside his panting steeds she found, o'erspent with toil reposing on the ground. To cool his glowing wound he sat apart, the wound inflicted by the Lycian dart of Sarpedon. Large drops of sweat from all his limbs descend, beneath his ponderous shield his sinews bend, whose ample belt that o'er his shoulder lay he eased and washed the clotted gore away. The goddess, leaning o'er the bending yoke, beside his coursers thus her silence broke. Degenerate prince, and not of Tydeus' kind, whose little body lodged a mighty mind, foremost he pressed in glorious toils to share, and scarce refrained when I forbade the war. Alone, unguarded, once he dared to go and feast encircled by the Theban foe. There braved and vanquished many a hardy knight. Such nerves I gave him, and such force in fight. Thou too, no less, hast been my constant care. Thy hands I armed, and sent thee forth to war. But thee or fear deters, or sloth detains. But thee, she says, either fear deters, or sloth detains. No drop of all thy father warms thy veins. So she shames him and says, you're nothing like your father. You're either afraid or lazy. The chief thus answered, mild, and said, Immortal maid, and by maid it means virgin. Immortal maid, I own thy presence, and confess thy aid. Not fear, thou knowest, withholds me from these plains. No sloth has seized me, but thy word restrains. From warring gods thou bad'st me turn my spear, and Venus only found resistance here. So Diomed here basically catches Athena and corrects her by reminding her that she's the one who told him to not fight against the gods. So when he saw Apollo and Mars engaged with the Trojans in battle against the Greeks, he remembered her word, her warning, and chose not to try to fight against them, but instead he retreated. So when she says, how dare you hide from the fight? You're nothing like your glorious father. He says, whoa, whoa, whoa. You told me not to fight against the gods. So he says, hence, goddess, go away, goddess. Heedful of thy high commands, loth I gave way and warned our Argive bands. In other words, it was because I was obeying you that I told the Greeks to retreat. For Mars, the homicide, the man-killer, these eyes beheld with slaughter red and raging round the field. Then thus Minerva speaks to Diomed and says, brave Tydides, hear, not Mars himself, nor aught immortal fear. In other words, now I'm telling you to fear no one, not even Mars himself. Full on the god impel thy foaming horse. Pallas commands, and Pallas will lend thee force. In other words, now you can fight against these gods because I'm here to help you. Rash, furious, blind, from these to those he flies, and every side of wavering combat tries. Large promise makes, and breaks the promise made. Now gives the Grecians, now the Trojans aid. She spoke, and to the steeds approaching near, drew from his seat the martial charioteer, the warrior charioteer. The vigorous power, the trembling car ascends, fierce for revenge, and Diomed attends. The groaning axle bent beneath the load, so great a hero and so great a god. She snatched the reins, she lashed with all her force, and full on Mars impelled the foaming horse. So Athena, and remember the names Pallas, Minerva, and Athena are all referring to the same person. She takes the reins of this chariot, and it sounds like Diomed joins her in the chariot. And full on, Mars impelled the foaming horse. In other words, went full speed after Mars with the horse. But first, to hide her heavenly visage, to make herself not appear, she spread black Orcus's helmet o'er her radiant head. Just then, gigantic Periphas lay slain, the strongest warrior of the Aetolian train. The god who slew him leaves his prostrate prize, stretched where he fell, and at Tydides flies. Now rushing fierce in equal arms appear the daring Greek, the dreadful god of war. Full at the chief, above his courser's head, from Mars's arm the enormous weapon fled. So Mars fires a javelin at Tydides or Diomed. Pallas opposed her hand, so she blocked it and caused to glance far from the car the strong immortal lance. Then through the force of Tydeus' warlike son, then Diomed threw. The javelin hissed, the goddess urged it on, she assisted it. Where the broad cincture girt his armor round, it pierced the god. His groin received the wound. From the rent skin the warrior tugs again. The smoking steel, Mars, bellows with the pain. Mars groans in pain. The god Mars, the god of battle, struck with a spear. Loud as the roar encountering armies yield, when shouting millions shake the thundering field. Both armies start and trembling gaze around, and earth and heaven re-bellow to the sound, echo the sound. As vapors blown by Austeres, Austeres is the south wind, the wind from the south. As vapors blown by Austere's sultry breath, pregnant with plagues, that is unhealthy air, the breeze from the south is considered unhealthy, shedding seeds of death. Beneath the rage of burning Sirius rise, and choke the parched earth and blacken all the skies. In such a cloud the god from combat driven, high o'er the dusky whirlwind scales the heaven. So Mars leaves the battle. Wild with his pain, he sought the bright abodes, and there sullen sat beneath the sire of gods, the father of the gods. Showed the celestial blood, and with a groan thus poured his complaints before the immortal throne. So Mars goes to the presence of Jupiter, shows him his injury, and complains, and says this: Can Jove, supine, that means laying down, flagitious facts survey, and brook the furies of this daring day? For mortal men celestial powers engage. So Mars is saying, what in the world is going on? Why are you allowing this man to disrespect and even strike gods and goddesses? Mortal men celestial powers engage, and gods on gods exert eternal rage. From thee, O Father, all these ills we bear, and thy fell daughter with the shield and spear. Thou gavest that fury to the realms of light, pernicious, wild, regardless of the right. All heaven beside reveres thy sovereign sway. Thy voice we hear, and thy behests obey. 'Tis hers to offend, and even offending share thy breast, thy counsels, thy distinguished care. So boundless she, and thou so partial grown, well may we deem the wondrous birth thy own. Now frantic Diomed at her command against the immortals lifts his raging hand. The heavenly Venus first his fury found, me next encountering, me he dared to wound. He spoke back, he's the one who attacked Venus, and now he's coming after me. Vanquished, I fled, even I, the god of fight. From mortal madness scarce was saved by flight. I was barely saved from death. Else hadst thou seen me sink on yonder plain, heaped around and heaving under loads of slain. So we have this interesting question of whether the gods can die. Of course, they're called immortal. But if Jupiter allows men to strike the gods in battle and injure them, who's to say that they actually are immortal? Or pierced with Grecian darts, for ages lie condemned to pain, though fated not to die. So what are you going to just leave me, a god, to be destroyed by men? Him thus upbraiding, so yelling at Jupiter, complaining to him, with a wrathful look, the Lord of thunders viewed, and stern bespoke. To me, perfidious, this lamenting strain. So he says to Mars, you're going to complain, you're going to fuss at me like this? Of lawless force shall lawless Mars complain? As if to say, if anyone is going to complain about the injustice of the battle, if anybody is going to complain, is it going to be you, the god of war? Of all the gods who tread the spangled or starry skies, you most unjust, most odious, most hateful in our eyes. In other words, the gods and goddesses hate war. They hate the god of war. Inhuman discord, strife. It's inhuman. Man, and this is a complex issue, but the idea here is that man naturally desires peace, but he's stirred up to discord. That's a complicated topic, a controversial issue to get into. But it says, inhuman discord is thy dire delight. You love for men to fight against each other. The waste of slaughter and the rage of fight, you love this destruction among men. You're going to complain to me? No bounds, no law thy fiery temper quells, and all thy mother in thy soul rebels. In vain our threats, in vain our power we use. She gives the example, and her son pursues. Yet long the inflicted pangs thou shalt not mourn, sprung since thou art from Jove and heavenly born, else singed with lightning hadst thou hence been thrown, where chained on burning rocks the Titans groan. Said if it wasn't for your mother, you would be destroyed. Thus he who shakes Olympus with his nod then gave to Pion's care the bleeding god. So Jupiter finishes speaking and sends Mars to be cared for. With gentle hand the balm he poured around and healed the immortal flesh and closed the wound. So it's interesting to think that immortal doesn't mean that they can't suffer. Immortal means they cannot die, but immortal doesn't mean that they cannot suffer. So this man Pion is some sort of physician or servant who cares for Mars's wound. He healed the immortal flesh and closed the wound, as when the figs pressed juice infused in cream to curds coagulates the liquid stream, sudden the fluids fix the parts combined, such and so soon the ethereal texture joined. Now that's some very poetic stuff. What he's saying is just that this medicine that was used, this balm used by Payan, brought this divine skin together and healed it quickly. Cleansed from the dust and gore, fair Hebe dressed his mighty limbs in an immortal vest. Glorious, Mars sat, in majesty restored, fast by the throne of heaven's superior Lord. So Mars took his seat beside Jupiter. Juno and Pallas mount the blessed abodes, their task performed, and they mix among the gods. So this brings us to the end of Book 5. And very importantly, we see here what has been accomplished in this book. Notice it says, Juno and Pallas mount the blessed abodes, their task performed. Their duty was done. What was their duty? To get Mars out of the battlefield. So Juno and Pallas came down from heaven to fight against the Trojans. They actually caused the injury to Mars. Mars returned to heaven and left the battlefield. And seeing that Mars had left the battlefield, Juno and Pallas considered their work to be done. And so instead of continuing to fight, they returned back among the gods. And this brings us to the end of Book 5. So a very long book, took 2 hours to read through, but we got through it, and hopefully that's clear enough for you to read it on your own and maybe pay a little more attention to the details. Sometimes, because I was just trying to move quickly through, I might have skipped over some things that I should have commented on, but you can read that for yourself if you'd like to. Now, let me just say one thing about these videos. You just had, for Book 5, 2 hours of instructional time. So if you watch these videos and sit through these reading guides, you're receiving hours of instructional time, which is what you actually need for high school studies. So Book 5 alone gave you 2 hours of instructional time. Now, if you continue studying, you can add more time to this lesson, and then you've got to work on your assignments and things like that. But just pay attention to how much time, how much instructional time you're collecting by working through these videos. Anyway, it's now time for you to study the book for yourself. Go through the book one time carefully. You can re-listen to these videos if you need to, but go through the book by yourself. Complete the assignments. Don't waste time. Don't be a perfectionist. Complete the assignments and submit them. If you haven't read and you don't know the material, I'm going to easily be able to see that in your answers, and I'll send them back to be redone. But if you feel confident that you know the content and you can complete the assessment, get the tasks done, and move on. So I hope this is helpful. If you've got any questions, please post them on the forum on the course page, and I'll do my best to get answers for you. I hope these are helpful. God bless.